Okay. Pen. All right, Rabbi, take it away. Sorry for the delay.
Okay, dear friends, it's a real pleasure to be with you today and join you in sunny Florida. A little bit of a change from the gloomy, gray, cloudy central London. Just kidding, it actually happens to be a decent weather day here, but I figured I'd connect over weather. But I do want to take a moment to, first of all, express a heartfelt debt of gratitude to your Rabbi and Rebbetzin for organizing this event among so much that they offer the community. And I think you really lucked out with such extraordinary shluchim, Rabbi and Rebbetzin Chadakov. And it's really a pleasure and a privilege to spend a few minutes together, connecting, growing, hopefully elevating as we come together to mark a very, very auspicious day in the Jewish calendar. I will say for those joining us online, if you're comfortable sharing your screens, I would love to see you as well. It's always a joy to interact with not just beautiful names, but also beautiful faces and spirits. Okay, let's begin with a lighthearted story with a joke. I may share a few jokes this afternoon, and I hope you'll bear with me. But this is the joke of an older couple who were very health conscious. And at some point, they were traveling down the highway when out of nowhere, a truck comes and levels their car, and they pass and they come to heaven, and Angel Gabriel is showing them around their penthouse suite. The fellow is super excited, but at some point he turns to the angel. He says, "How much is it going to cost in rent?" The angel said, "Well, it's free. That's the best part of heaven." And yeah, they work up a good appetite. And when they are good and hungry, they enter a beautiful ballroom filled with exotic food stations and Michelin star chefs from all over the world. The husband, who is very well trained, turns to the angel and says, "Where's the low-calorie section? Where's the kale? Where's the flaxseed?" At this point, the angel says, "My friend, this is the best part of heaven. You don't have to worry about what you eat, when you eat, or how much you eat." The fellow at this point turns to his wife. He says, "Honey, if not for you and your silly health food, we could have been here 10 years ago." I'm not sure if it's just a time delay or if that was a bomb. Okay.
Oh, no, it was a time delay. Time delay.
Thank you. You guys are so wonderful. You're so effusive. Okay. Anyhow, we'll try a few more a little later on. So let's get started with a beautiful, beautiful story. One of my favorite stories. It's the story of Shmuel Tamir, who was a minister in Israel of economy at the time when Menachem Begin was the prime minister. Years earlier, when Israel was going through a difficult economic period, Tamir felt that it was important to speak to one of the preeminent sages of Jerusalem, the legendary Rabbi Aryeh Levin, who was called the Tzaddik of Yerushalayim, who was widely known and respected for his compassion. He wanted to enlist his support for a religious ruling, even though Tamir himself was not personally observant. You see, Tamir felt that Israel's difficult economy was being strained by the subsidies that were being given out to many families who do not practice family planning. And so he asked the rabbi if he might encourage his disciples, his students, his followers to limit the children they brought into this world. Rabbi Levine responded first and foremost from a legal perspective, from a philosophical perspective, and then he shared with him a mystical perspective by introducing a little anecdote or story that took them back many years. He says a couple, very young, just out of university, came to see me. They had had one child and they fell pregnant. And they came to ask me if they could abort the child because they felt they couldn't afford to sustain this child in a comfortable manner. On that occasion, Rabbi Levine tells Shmuel Tamir, "I told this couple what I'm telling you," and he gave them all the same answers. And then I shared with him one mystical idea. I said that every soul that is selected to come into this world is given a unique purpose. Indeed, our sages teach that many, many souls never make it to this earth. But those that do are each endowed with a unique mission. Said Rabbi Aryeh Levine, putting aside all of the religious and legal and technical arguments, what will come of the mission that this little child was sent to this world to perform? A mission that no soul prior and no soul ever after will ever be able to achieve in its place. Powerful words. Shmuel was not too pleased with the rabbi's response. And before leaving, somewhat facetiously, he turns to the rabbi and he says to him, Rabbi, tell me, did that couple end up having a child? He says they did. Shmuel says, what did they have? He said they had a boy. And Shmuel said, again, facetiously, and tell me, Rabbi, did that boy achieve the purpose for which his soul was sent to the world? At this point, the rabbi looked him in the eye and said, Shmuel, only you can answer that question. Because all those years ago, the couple who came to see me with that question were your parents. So tell me, Shmuel, are you fulfilling the mission for which you were sent to this earth to achieve?
Why can't I, yeah?
Sorry?
Why can't I, yeah?
So, dear friends, when some of us hear the word mission, we think in grand and sweeping terms about global change. But the truth is that the world and history has changed one person and one action at a time. The story is told about Bob Fawkes, an American pilot who flew a B-17 bomber during World War II. On one mission, he sustained hostile fire from Nazi anti-aircraft guns. Even though his gas tanks were hit, the plane did not explode, and Fawkes was able to land the plane safely. On the morning following the raid, Fawkes asked his crew chief for the German shell that had hit his plane. He wanted to keep a souvenir of his good luck. The crew chief reported that not one, but 11 explosive shells had been found in the gas tanks, but mysteriously, none of them had detonated. The mechanic had never seen anything like it. So the technicians opened the 11 rounds and they found them hollow, missing the explosive charge, all but one. The exception contained a carefully rolled piece of paper. On it, a message had been scrawled. The note read, "This is all we can do for you now." A courageous prisoner of war forced to work on an assembly line in a Nazi munitions plant had disarmed the bombs and scribbled a note. He couldn't end the war, but what he could do was save one plane. He couldn't do everything, but he could do something. And that's what he did. You see, we must never discount the smallness of our deeds. Great movements for change start with small acts by people who had minimal capacity. Think of it. Pharaoh's daughter had only her arm to reach out for Moses. Moses had a staff, David a sling, Samson a jawbone, Rachav a string, and our assembly line worker a piece of paper. On a bit of a lighter note, you know the story of the fellow who was down and out. He'd been fired recently from his job, and he was looking for work. He reads in the New York Times an ad saying that the Bronx Zoo were looking for human actors. So he decides, why not? I could probably do it. He shows up, and they tell him, due to an economic shortage and crisis, budgetary cuts, we had to get rid of our chimpanzees. And so here we have a chimpanzee suit, and we'd like you to dress up and behave like a chimpanzee, day in, day out, and we'll pay you X amount for that particular role. Initially, the guy feels uncomfortable. I mean, children, families would pay to enter the zoo and watching him swing around like an idiot. But he thinks to himself, listen, I need the money. Okay, he's swinging, beating his chest. He started to get the hang of it, and he started to enjoy himself. Until one day, while he's swinging around, he makes a miscalculation and ends up swinging right into the lion's den. Petrified, he sees the lion begin to make his way towards him dramatically, and he fears that the end is near, and so he calls out with every fiber of his being the Jewish prayer of confession, the Jewish prayer of monotheism, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Assuming that he was about to be eaten, suddenly the lion roars, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. And they hear the panda from the next cage over saying, pipe down, you fools, or we'll all lose our jobs. One of the verses in the essential Jewish prayer of the Shema teaches, Yahrtzeit Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha, uv'chol meodecha. Love God, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all of your might. Our sages teach that all of your heart teaches that one should develop an emotional attachment with Hashem. All of your soul teaches that one should love God so much that they should be willing to give up their life for their faith. And with all your might means with all of your resources, with your time, with your energy, and with your money. What is odd about this particular teaching is that of the three things we are encouraged to be willing to sacrifice to show our devotion to Hashem, the easiest seems to be one's resources. Next would come developing an emotional connection with God. And undoubtedly, the most difficult of all would be the willingness to give up one's life rather than convert out of the faith. Yet in the Shema, the order begins with the emotional and then progresses to the willingness to sacrifice one's life itself. And only then, curiously, climaxes with the willingness to give up one's resources. Why is that? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe once explained it this way. He says, on some level, it is more difficult to live by your faith than it is to die for your faith. For some reason, one of the dynamics of relationships is that we are sometimes willing to give up everything for a relationship, but we are simply unwilling to give up just something. You know those stories you read which tell the story of a parent whose child is kidnapped and they go to extreme lengths, even willing to die in order to save the life of their child. Now, what I want to know is what happens in the home of that family on a regular Wednesday afternoon when there are no kidnappers or terrorists threatening their children's life. What then? Is the unlimited love of parent to child recognizable in the daily interactions they have with their children? I'd venture to say very rarely. But isn't this completely illogical? It's like a friend who asks you to borrow a few $100 and you say, no, I can't help you. And then he calls you up and says he has a terminal illness and will not survive unless you can help him pay for the treatment, which will cost tens of thousands of dollars. And you work hard to raise the funds for him. But does this make sense? Rebbe once observed that there were Soviet Jews who lived lives of extraordinary sacrifice for Judaism while they were in the Soviet Union. And yet when they arrived to the shores, the welcoming shores of America, and no one was persecuting them anymore, of their own accord, they stopped observing the very same practices that back in Russia they had been willing to die for. The noted psychoanalyst, Dr. Alfred Adler, put it this way: sometimes it's easier to fight for one's principles than to live up to them. Friends, we find the same phenomenon in Jewish history. Throughout our past, there was external pressure and persecution that often elicited our greatest religious engagement. There was an American public intellectual who put it this way. He says, anti-Semitism is bad for the Jews, but it's good for Judaism. Friends, why is this the case? Because sometimes it's only when your loved one or your faith is threatened do you realize just how important it is to you and how much you would be willing to give up for it. In the moving words of the American Lebanese poet Khalil Gibran, love knows not its own depth until the hour of separation. It behooves me to mention the following example. On January 23rd, 2002, on his way to what he thought was an interview with Sheikh Mubarak Ali Gilani at the Village restaurant in downtown Karachi, Daniel Pearl, a journalist for the Wall Street Journal with American and Israeli citizenship, was kidnapped by terrorists. On February 21st, 2002, a videotape was released titled The Slaughter of the Spy Journalist, the Jew, Daniel Pearl. During the 3-minute video, Pearl said, "My name is Daniel Pearl. My father is Jewish. My mother is Jewish. I am Jewish. And my grandfather was one of the founders of Bnei Brak." These would be his last words before his life was brutally cut short. And my friends, in his day-to-day life, Daniel had not led a religious life. And yet when he stared death in the eye, the one thing that mattered most to him, the one thing he chose to share by which to be defined and remembered was his Jewish faith and identity. This might explain a very moving tradition quoted in the writings of the Holy Shalah, where he writes the following: when we recite the Shema at the climax of the Ne'ilah prayer on Yom Kippur, one should have the intention that if it came to it, one would be willing to give up their life for the sanctification of God's name. This holy intention, says the Shalah, is then considered as if one had actually done so. Now, what is this unsettling meditation might be trying to achieve is to get us to realize how much we would be willing to give up for our faith and for our identity. And then to translate this crystallized love and loyalty for Hashem into our daily life and practice. On a bit of a lighter note, they tell the story of a couple. The husband wasn't feeling too well. And so they went to the doctor. The doctor checks him out. The doctor sends him out and speaks to his wife and tells his wife, listen, dear, your husband is suffering from extreme stress disorder. She says, what do I do? He says, well, I'm going to give you the following formula. And if you adhere to it, there's a chance he may get better. Every morning, you got to wake him up with breakfast in bed. And then as he gets out of bed, you got to give him his favorite suit, send him off to work with his favorite lunch, send him 3 WhatsApps and 4 texts every single day saying that he's God's gift to humanity, the best thing since sliced bread. When he comes back home, you got to greet him with mood lighting, and of course his favorite dinner, then dance a little bit, be intimate, and over time, your husband may get better. The wife listens carefully. She says, thank you for your advice, doctor. She leaves the office. They get into the car, and as they're heading home, the husband asks nervously, what did the doctor say? She said, he says you're not going to make it. Friends, I find it deeply moving that when Moshe told God, I am flawed and imperfect, send someone more capable than I am, Hashem responded by saying, Ma ze biyadacha. What is it that is in your hand? According to a beautiful interpretation, the words actually read, Mi ze shebiyadacha, from that which is in your hand. Meaning Hashem says to Moses, and really to each one of us by extension through all of time, I don't demand that you be someone you are not, or give something you don't have. All I ask of you is that you make the most of the person you are and the abilities you possess. Don't promise me the everything you don't have. Just give me something from that which is in your hands. One of my favorite stories is the one my father used to tell me as a child when we sat together in the synagogue. He used to tell me the following story. Back in the day in the former Soviet Union, there was a nachalnik, a little mayor, who would gather the townspeople to spew some Russian motherland propaganda. And he would gather the townspeople in a semicircle, and he'd turn to the first fellow and say, if you had 200 horses, what would you do with them? And of course, the fellow would respond, I would give them to Mother Russia. He would turn to the second, if you had 500 cows, what would you do with them? I would give them to Mother Russia. And this would go on from person to person until he came back around to the first guy and said, and what if you had 2 roosters? Suddenly the guy is silent. He thinks, he's ruminating. The nachalnik, the mayor, turns to him and says, I don't understand. 20 minutes ago, you were willing to give up 200 horses to Mother Russia. And now you're not so sure about 2 roosters? The fellow says to him, the thing is, I actually own 2 roosters. Isn't it true, dear friends, that so often we're willing to give up everything, but we're not willing to give this something that we have? On this note, I want to share with you such a powerful idea about tzedakah especially, because so often when it comes to acts of generosity, to carving out time in our day or week, to be caring and sharing, to regulating and regularizing gifts to tzedakah to an important cause, whatever it may be, from spiritual, like your local Chabad, to educational, to humanitarian, to whatever it is you're passionate about. So often we say, when I make it, then I will give, right? There's this sort of notion out there that the more we have, the more we give. The spiritual teachings of Kabbalah teach the opposite. The more one gives, the more they receive. That's the spiritual math. It's not material. It's not necessarily scientific. It's not economic in the materialist sense, but it's true of the spiritual dynamic of creation. The more we show Hashem that we can be an allocator the more Hashem extends us a greater line of credit. And I always thought to myself, growing up as a child in New Haven, Connecticut, we would often spend our Sunday mornings traveling to Crown Heights, that exotic, wonderful neighborhood where Chabad shluchim are incubated and marinated in that special Chabad sauce. And I would wait sometimes for hours as a little child to receive $1 from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which I would keep but exchange and give one of my own to charity in its place. And I thought to myself, $1? I mean, it's a small number, isn't it? But perhaps what the Rebbe was teaching is that you don't have to give a lot to make a difference. $1, one person at a time accumulates. And if we each can become givers and see ourselves as such, the world truly will become a better place. You know, there's a beautiful story told about the Rebbe who was visited by a businessman from England whose name was Freddie Hager. And Freddie Hager himself came from a Hasidic dynasty, not Lubavitch, a different one. And when he came to the Rebbe as a young man, the Rebbe asked him, you know where you come from? He said, sure. And he took out a picture of his grandfather who was a Rebbe. And the Rebbe did something quite unusual to my knowledge. The Rebbe asked him if he might make a copy and leave one with him. And then the Rebbe asked him a question that's very unusual. He says, do you know what a Rebbe is? And to the best of my knowledge, this is one of the few occasions where the Rebbe himself defined what a Rebbe is. Thankfully, Freddie remained silent. The Rebbe continued and said, the very first Rebbe was the Holy Baal Shem Tov. And the Holy Baal Shem Tov had a custom that every day he used to collect funds for the poor, for the orphans, for the stranger, for the immigrant, for the refugee. And every night, he would not go to sleep until he had given away everything of value he had collected that day. Said the Rebbe, that's what it means to be a Rebbe. On a different occasion, he told the Chassid Reb Zalman Gordon, when I say the Shema in the evening, before going to bed, I do a spiritual stock taking, right? And I ask myself, have I given everything I have to this day? That, dear friends, is the definition of spiritual success. Taking what we do have and making it available for a higher purpose and to serve the community and the wider world. Consider the following story told by a businessman named Charles Ramat. In his own words, I once came to see the Rebbe to discuss various life issues. I was able to confide in him. I once said to him, Rebbe, I'm having a crisis of faith. I'm not sure I believe. I love Judaism. I love its many rituals, but they're not really so much a part of my life. He says that the Rebbe's response was so deep and incredible, and it was tailor-made for me. He asked me, do you keep kosher? Do you put on the tefillin or keep Shabbat? And I said, honestly, I don't. He then said to me, if I ask you to do one thing without any precondition, will you agree to do it? I said, yes. Anything you ask of me, I will do. The Rebbe then said, will you and your wife agree to light Shabbat candles every Friday night? Thinking to myself, I got off easy. I said, of course. And from that point on, he says, we've never missed lighting Shabbat candles. Friday night became sacrosanct for our whole family. When our kids were teenagers, they didn't go out to parties that night. Even though I had all kinds of business dealings going on, Friday night, I always made a point of being home. Lighting Shabbat candles might be a simple mitzvah in the grander scheme of things, but for us, it was absolutely life-changing. Shabbat dinner became special to all of us. Baking challah was something we looked forward to. Opening our home to guests became special. To me, this was the genius of the Rebbe. Had he insisted that I become fully observant, I may have tried, but it would never have lasted. And yet this one mitzvah, by the way, not even biblical, has kept my family on a Jewish path throughout our lives, and my daughters have followed suit. What a window into the Rebbe's revolutionary approach towards spiritual development and growth. You see, darkness is banished not through the process of elimination, but illumination. In another story, after speaking fervently about the importance of Shabbat observance to a Jew who was struggling to let go of working on Shabbos, The Rebbe concluded, but if for whatever reason you find yourself going to work on Shabbos, God forbid, make an effort to leave for work 1 minute late. If ever you find yourself heading to work on Shabbat again, chas v'shalom, add another minute in honor of Shabbat. What a story, friends. What a beautiful example of the Rebbe's revolutionary, it's not all or nothing approach. An empowering approach so beautifully embodied by my esteemed fellow shluchim and shluchot the world over. Friends, a wise man once said, your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values become your character, and your character becomes your destiny. So dear friends, let us take control over our destiny by selecting and curating the thoughts that will become our words, the words that will become our actions, the actions to become our habits, our values, character, and destiny. I believe it was Tolstoy, the famous Russian writer, who once said, everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change themselves. I disagree. I think we each really do want to change for the better. We want to become the people we were meant to be, the people we are capable of becoming. Many of us just don't know how or where to begin. Says God, open for me the opening, the size of the eye of a needle, and I will open for you an opening the size of a large cavernous hall. Put differently by Lao Tzu, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one single step. So as we mark the 28th Yahrtzeit of the Rebbe's passing this coming Shabbos, I invite you to take that one step, to choose that one mitzvah, not all or nothing, not everything, but something from that which is in your hand, mizeh shebiyadecha. Let us honor the Rebbe's life and legacy, and let us connect to his neshama and to his mission. Let us become his extension, his arms and legs, so to speak, by renewing our devotion and dedication to our national calling, which is to illuminate our world, one person, one day, and one mitzvah at a time. Let me conclude with a story that has lifted my spirits and helped energize me during those moments when I feel completely drained, when I feel like I have nothing left to give. It's the story of a gentleman who had an urgent matter to discuss with the Rebbe, and when he called the secretariat, they told him, sir, we can give you a meeting with the Rebbe at 3 a.m. in 6 months' time. And the fellow said, yes, but I need something earlier. They said, sorry, there's so many people seeking the Rebbe's blessing. Now the fellow knew somebody in the community who told him, I have a way for you to circumvent protocol. Every day the Rebbe leaves his home at a certain time and gets into his car on the way to 770. So why don't you go and ambush him on the way? Stop him as he gets out of his house. No one will stop you. The fellow, none the wiser, does exactly that. He shows up the next morning, and as the Rebbe leaves his home, he stops the Rebbe. The Rebbe very courteously listens to his issue. 6-7 minutes go by. The Rebbe gives him a blessing and some advice. He leaves, and the Rebbe gets into the car and heads to 770. From across the road, there were 2 rabbinical students who were watching and observing this scene. And they rush over to him, and they chastise him, and they say, how dare you steal 6 or 7 minutes of the Rebbe's time? There was a system, there was an order. The fellow felt absolutely terrible, and he sat down to write a letter to the Rebbe of apology. And in it he says, Rebbe, I apologize for taking of your precious time. I didn't know better. The Rebbe sent him back a note with 2 points. The first point the Rebbe said was that time that those boys accosted you was actually a time they were meant to be in yeshiva. So first and foremost, the Rebbe was saying, don't take them so serious. Second of all, the Rebbe says that the holy Baal Shem Tov teaches us that a soul can come into this world and spend an entire lifetime, 70, 80 or plus years, all in order to do one favor for another human being. The Rebbe writes to him, who knows, perhaps my soul came into this world so that I might do you that favor this morning in our conversation. What a powerful story. What a powerful perspective. And what I love about that story is that in truth, having researched the Rebbe's life and written 4 books, and please God, I will be writing some more, I can tell you that in my estimation and understanding, that's the way the Rebbe viewed every single encounter. Perhaps this is the one. Perhaps this is the reason my soul came into this world. And if you and I could incorporate that way of thinking, perhaps not 24/7, which seems beyond our reach, but for an hour every day, or even a week, I believe we can switch ourselves on to our personal mission and purpose. And in so doing, really and truly embody the mission for which each one of us has come to this world. Because as the great Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, the holy Baal Shem Tov's grandson, taught, the day each one of us is born is the day God decided that the world cannot exist without us. L'chaim, friends. Thank you for listening. I'm wishing you an early Gimel Tammuz that is meaningful and uplifting and full of spiritual growth. Bezrat Hashem. L'chaim.
Second. Thank you very much, Rabbi Kalmenson.